Good afternoon, one and all. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our today's speaker, who is going to talk us about hypersonic technology, past, present, and future. Let me just briefly introduce him. His name is Dr. Snehal Mandlik. He has obtained his bachelor's degree from Aeronautical Society of India in the aeromechanical stream. Later on, he has pursued his Masters of Engineering in Computational Fluid Dynamics from the Department of Aerospace Engineering, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. And later, he continued his PhD at the same institute, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, where his doctoral research is focused on mainly exploring the unsteadiness phenomena occurring in the front of blunt body in hypersonic flow and incorporating active and passive control methods to reduce or control such unsteadiness. His research interests are mainly include flow control techniques, DBD plasma actuators, gas dynamics, and obviously hypersonics. He is a life member of the Aeronautical Society of India, and he has been working in the field of hypersonics from past 6 years. Presently, he is working in BMS College of Engineering at the Department of Aerospace Engineering as an assistant professor. He also has published several papers in national and international conferences as well as journals. I now request Dr. Mandlik to enlighten us about today's topic. I now hand over this session to Dr. Mandlik. Sir.
Thank you, Kishore, for the very warm welcome. So, during these COVID times, I would like to tell one thing, that everyone should take care of each other and be a helping hand to everyone, so that we can save more lives in this COVID time. Obviously, we have lost a lot of our close relatives, so be a helping hand to everyone. So, I would like to start my presentation for today. So, myself, Snehal Mandlik. I'm an assistant professor at Department of Aerospace Engineering at BMS College of Engineering. And today I'm going to talk about the hypersonic technology, the past, present, and future. Okay. So, my presentation goes in a very brief overview about the hypersonic technology, like what are the different kinds of vehicles, hypersonic vehicles present in the current state. What was the history of hypersonic flows? What are the challenges that we face when we travel at a hypersonic speed? And what is the present or current research trend in hypersonics? Okay. And obviously, we'll look into what is the future of hypersonics. So let us imagine that you want to travel from India to UK or from India to USA in a couple of hours, or from any continent to other continent in a couple of hours. So is it possible that you do this journey in only like 2 to 3 hours? Yes. So my answer would be yes for this. Why? So let's see in a while. So if you want to travel from India to US, let us say, for an example, you need to travel at a speed of about more than 3,500 kilometers per hour, which is equivalent to 1.2 kilometers per second. Or maybe between India to UK, you might have to travel at a speed of 1.2 kilometers per second. From India to US, it would come about 2 kilometers per second. So if you are able to travel at such high speed, which is enormous amount of speed, you will be able to travel between these two countries in a couple of hours. Okay, now let us, before going into what is this enormous amount of speed, so let us understand what speed we are talking about here. So generally, when we talk about very high speeds, we generally talk in terms of Mach number. Mach number is given by the speed of object, the ratio of the speed of object to the speed of sound. So let us consider this particular vehicle which is shown in the figure. It has a velocity of about maybe 100 km per hour, or maybe it can travel at about 200 kilometers per hour. So if you look at the speed of sound at the sea level conditions, okay, that is on the ground, it would come about 340 meters per second. And now if you calculate the Mach number given by this particular formula, you will understand that Mach number will come far, far lesser than zero point 0.3. So such kind of vehicles which are traveling at such low Mach numbers, which is less than zero point 0.3, are traveling at a speed which is considered as a low subsonic flow speeds. Okay. Now our airliners, let us say for an example, the Airbus 380. This airliner generally takes a speed of about zero point 0.8 or 0.7. That falls between the regime of 0.3 and 0.8. And this kind of speeds are generally regarded in the category of high subsonic flows. Now, what if I increase my Mach number? What if I go close to the speed of sound? So, if let us assume that we cross the speed of sound and we were able to achieve the Mach number greater than 1. So, we enter the okay, that is after crossing the sound barrier, which is equal to the speed of sound. Now, imagine that if you go at a very, very high speed, which is far more greater than the speed of sound. So that regime would be considered as a hypersonic speed. When you have generally in the flow dynamics, the speeds more than Mach number 5 are considered as a hypersonic speeds. Okay, now what is this hypersonic? So before talking about hypersonic, let us see how do you actually cross the sound barrier, which is the speed of sound. So when any vehicle travels at a speed closer to the speed of sound, let us say for an example, in this particular figure, a simple aircraft, which is a military aircraft, is traveling at a speed closer to the speed of sound, which is about maybe 0.8 or 0.9. It will experience a shock waves which is generated on the surface of the body, and that shock waves is going to interact with the boundary layers, and it is going to separate it. So that is going to induce the drag on the body. So as you will also see such kind of phenomena in the flow field when you are reaching the speed of sound in an atmosphere. So this particular phenomena is called as the sonic boom, that is created when you are about to cross the sound barrier. Okay. Okay, so let us see in a subsonic speed, when you have uh, at a subsonic speeds which is Mach number less than 1, you will see any object will be emitting the pressure waves. These pressure waves, which are emitted by the object, will travel in all the different directions, and it will get the information of the surroundings to the object which is traveling at a particular speed. Now, at a subsonic speeds, this information is readily available with the object. Why? Because the pressure waves which are traveling at that speed, pressure waves which travels at a speed of sound. When your vehicle is traveling less than the speed of sound, you obviously know the information about the surrounding, and hence you can adjust yourself with the surrounding. Or in other words, the flow around the object will adjust itself such that it follows the contour of the object. Now, when you reach Mach number 1, you see a very complicated phenomena where the pressure waves will overlap each other, and the object will just know that there is something around me. And when you cross the speed of Mach number 1, you will see that before even the vehicle which is traveling at a speed more than the Mach number 1, the pressure waves are lagging behind the object. Okay, so the object would be moving faster than the speed of sound. That means the pressure waves which are moving will be lagging behind the object. So that means the object now doesn't have any information about the surrounding. So the gas molecules which are present in the surrounding would actually come and hit the object. So what will happen after that? The gas molecules comes, hit the object, and it will bounce back, or it will become stationary on the object. So once it bounces back, the bounce back gas molecules will interact with the upcoming gas molecules, and they will form a thin shock layer, which is shown here. And that thin shock layer, uh, that thin layer of air is called as a shock wave. Okay, and this is the major effect when you actually cross the sound barrier. Fine. So there is a subtle difference between the shock waves that are observed in a supersonic flow and in a hypersonic flow. So as you can see in this particular figure, the supersonic flow shock waves are quite away from the body. That means the angle, let us say I draw this angle which the shock wave makes with the upcoming stream is quite large as compared to the angle which is made by the shock wave in a hypersonic speeds. So in hypersonic speeds, the shock waves are quite closer to the body. So we'll go back to our question that can we travel within a couple of hours? Yes. So if you travel at a speed of about 1.2 kilometer per second, you will be able to reach UK in maybe a couple of hours, maybe 2 hours. And if you are able to travel travel at a speed of 2 kilometers per second, you will be able to reach USA from India maybe in just 2 or 3 hours. So these speeds, what I am talking about, corresponds to Mach number equals greater than 5. Okay. So what is the meaning of hypersonic technology that I am talking about? The hypersonic technology means that we are going to save our time. Probably you might have a lunch in one country and go back for the dinner to your own country. You can go for a space exploration, you can go for interplanetary travels, or you can just go for a tour to the space with your family. So once the hypersonic technology comes into picture, all these things could be possible. There are certain applications of hypersonics. So it could be used, the technology could be used for space exploration, the interplanetary travel, the missiles guidance system, the missiles which could be useful for the national security, the atmospheric re-entry of the vehicle into any of the planet's atmosphere, and then obviously the commercial flights, which will be helpful for the common man. So there are certain subdisciplines we must look into before getting into hypersonics. So these subdisciplines of hypersonics governs the entire flow physics, which flow physics or the design of the vehicle. First is the structure. So when you are traveling at a very high speeds, the vehicle experiences very high mechanical loads, which may not be very stringent for the subsonic or the supersonic flights aerodynamics, but for the hypersonic aerodynamics, it is very important that you design a fuselage which can withstand such high mechanical loads. Next is the guidance and control. If you are traveling at such high speeds, which is equivalent to 2 kilometers per second, let us say, for an example. So at that high speeds, you may not be able to guide your vehicle using a satellite or using a ground station. So there is a need to develop an autonomous guidance systems and advanced control systems, which will guide the vehicle in all the different atmospheric conditions. Okay, and also the hypersonic vehicles deal with a high altitude, and there is a need to additionally include the control measures such that at that higher altitudes the vehicle should be able to sustain the speeds. The next is the propulsion, our conventional or the traditional propulsion systems like turbojet or turboprops, which are used for the subsonic aircrafts, and the ramjet, which are used for the supersonic aircrafts, may not be very useful for the hypersonic. So there has to be a different propulsion system which could be useful for the hypersonic flow. Maybe the propulsion system has to be completely integrated with the entire aircraft, and which might not even have the moving parts. So they use a special kind of propulsion system that is called as a scramjet propulsion system, which is the supersonic combustion ramjet engine. Okay. Then all these different subdisciplines are governed by one important phenomena, and that is aerothermodynamics. That is because of the aerodynamics and the thermodynamics uh, acting on a hypersonic vehicle. So whatever the mechanical loads or the thermal loads or the aerothermal loads acting on a hypersonic vehicle will decide how the fundamental design of a structure, how the fundamental design of a guidance and control system, and also the design of the propulsion system will look like. So there are a few types of hypersonic vehicles which we see in current trend. So the first is the atmospheric re-entry vehicles, which are shown in here. And the second could be your launch vehicles, space launch vehicles. Third could be your hypersonic weapons, and then the hypersonic flight, that is a commercial flight. So before talking about these vehicles, let us see uh, what hypersonic actually means. So hypersonic is a discipline which connects the aeronautical as well as the astronautical engineering. So where we see the body is moving in a gaseous atmosphere, where the velocities of the body will be far larger than that of the speed of sound. Okay, or the speed of sound in the gases. Now, specifically, the aeronautical engineering deals with the flow around the vehicles which are traveling at a subsonic speeds or the supersonic speeds. That could include the airliners, your helicopters, your drones, or maybe a supersonic fighter. And all these different phenomena occur. All these different phenomena occur in a within the Earth's atmosphere. Now, coming to the astronautics domain, it deals with the orbital motion of the satellites and the planets. Okay, the motion is obviously happening in the vacuum of the space. So, the hypersonic, which is the field, the discipline which connects the aeronautics and the astronautics, sits between these two fields, where if you want to travel, if you want to increase the speed from aeronautics and enter the astronautics domain, you need to have a certain gateway. So hypersonic could act a gateway between that connects the aeronautics and the astronautics. Particularly, if you talk about the hypersonic speeds, it could be bounded by a lower limit of as low as about 1.5 kilometers per second, and as and it will be bounded by the maximum altitude of about 90 kilometers, roughly about 90 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Okay, so as I was mentioning, there are a few types of hypersonic vehicles. So one is the atmospheric re-entry vehicle. The classical figure that you see here is of Apollo 11, which is from the moon's mission in 1969, which could enter the Earth atmosphere at a certain orbital trajectory. Okay, so when the vehicle enters the Earth atmosphere or any other atmosphere of the planet, it will enter at a speed of about 8 to 12 kilometers per second. And when it is entering at that high speeds, it will suddenly experience the gaseous environment, and in that gaseous environment there will be a high mechanical loads and high heating around the surface. Okay, and it is also important that this atmospheric re-entry vehicle enters the Earth atmosphere and it follows a particular trajectory, and there should not be very large landing radius for this uh, atmospheric vehicle, re-entry vehicle. Why? Because if obviously these vehicles are landed in a sea, so if the landing radius is quite large, there will be a huge investment that could go in only finding your re-entry vehicle. The second kind of hypersonic vehicles would be of importance to launch a certain objects into the space or into the orbits of the Earth. So that could include some of your rockets. Obviously, these launch vehicles, whatever shown in the figure, are supersonic, and but the one using this particular launch vehicles, the rocket launch vehicles, we can launch the spaceships like the one shown in figure, which is the RLVTD, that is the Reusable Launch Vehicle Technology Demonstrator developed by ISRO. So rocket, whenever the rocket launches the vehicle, it follows a particular trajectory. Now, before exiting the edge of the space, or before exiting this particular atmospheric limit, it should add a certain velocity to that object, which has to be placed either in the orbit, or which has to escape the orbit. So depending on that velocity, the object, let's say for instance the satellite, will be placed in a circular orbit. There could be another few other means to launch the spaceships, like spaceships using the hypersonic gun rails, as well as some other technologies which are still under development. So when you use such high speeds at ground itself, you will be facing the heat loads that is acting on the surface of this vehicle. Okay. And there are certain a few hypersonic weapons which could be developed to protect the national for the national security purposes. Okay, like the intercontinental ballistic missiles, the boost glide, or the cruise missiles. These all could be useful uh, to protect the nation. Okay. This kind of missile could also be very helpful in delivering the conventional or the nuclear payloads within a few minutes, and it can also effectively penetrate the missile defense system. And also this kind of weapons would be helpful to kick down the satellites which might be roaming around in the in your atmosphere. Okay. And few other applications of a missile of these hypersonic weapons includes uh, the launching of a small or medium-sized satellites at a very low cost. And a very final that type of hypersonic vehicle could be a hypersonic commercial flight, where everyone would like to see in a near future, that could make us the civil transportation very fast. This is an interesting and an exciting field where the people are still working, and it will be operating within the Earth atmosphere. Okay, but when you're operating in the Earth atmosphere, you will obviously see that this kind of vehicles will experience large drag forces and large heat loads around it, and those are the few challenges in the hypersonic flow field. Okay, so this is a view of NASA's X-43A, which is a hypersonic craft, which they have tested a decade ago. So coming to the history of hypersonic flow. So how did the hypersonic flight came into the picture? So in 19 for the picture what you see in this slide is the picture of a V2 bomber. That's a supersonic, originally designed as a supersonic missile during the World War by Walter and Brown. Now, after the World War got over, this rocket, or this V2 bomber, was used only for the experimental purpose. And one fine day, when this rocket was launched on 24th February 1949, they were not able to recover it. So this rocket, they later found out that this rocket went as high as 392 kilometers from the Earth's surface, and it was able to reach the Mach number 5.3. And on that day, the V2 bomber became the first human-made object to go hypersonic speeds. Okay. Now, when this particular object, which was originally designed as a supersonic missile, was went hypersonic. So what happened to the vehicle? So the answer lies in the next slide. So let us see one video about what could happen if you go hypersonic. So this is one of the experiments that was done at NASA's Langley Aerodynamics wind tunnel, the hypersonic wind tunnel, where the model was kept in a hypersonic flow of Mach number 6.9. So we have a spherical headed cylinder here, hemispherical headed cylinder. So when the sphere is kept in a hypersonic flow, you can see that. Yeah, let's observe what happens to the object. So if you could see that the front nose of the object is melting down, and eventually the entire object will disappear in the atmosphere. So it is very surprising to know that at such high speeds, if the material or if the craft is not able to bear the mechanical and the thermal loads, it will melt down or it will turn out into ashes. And that's what happened to the V2 bomber. Okay. And if you look a little bit ahead, we have a conical object kept. They had a conical object kept in the wind tunnel at the same speed. So the conical cylinder turned out to be a hemispherical headed cylinder. Okay, so it is surprising to know, as I said, the V2 bomber has completely disintegrated or it has burnt into the ashes. So next is after a few years, on 12th April 1961, Flight Major Yuri Gagarin took the first flight around the Earth on the Vostok 1, that is the Soviet Union spaceship, and he was the very first human being to experience the hypersonic flight or hypersonic speeds. The speeds that he was able to experience was about Mach number 25. That is again a very huge or very tremendous amount of speeds that one can experience in a spaceship. So he took a flight of about 108 minutes around the Earth. Later, there were so many developments in 1960s itself. In let's say, for an example, in 1961, uh, on May 5, Alan B. Shepard became the second man who took the hypersonic flight in space, where his re-entry vehicle was at a hypersonic speed of about Mach number 5. In the same year, on June 23rd, the US Air Force test pilot Major Robert White flew a X-15 aircraft, which was a hypersonic aircraft, and he was able to fly it at about Mach number 5.3. And in the same year, the X-15 broke its own record, and it was able to reach Mach number 6. And later, after a few years, on August 22, 1963, the X-15 broke its own record again, and it was able to reach Mach number 7 at an altitude of about 107 kilometers. Okay, so 1961 was observed to be a bumper year for the manned hypersonic flights, where the humans could actually experience the hypersonic speeds in either the re-entry vehicle or uh, on the hypersonic aircraft. So, be it the so hypersonic has been so why do we want the hypersonic? So right from the Wright brothers first flight in 1903 to the Robert Goddard's liquid propellant rocket engine, which is shown here, the man has always been urging for only one single thing, that to fly faster and faster and to fly higher and higher. Okay. With that single urge, the man is humans are going towards the hypersonic speed. So this is the moon's mission, which was taken, which happened in 1969, where the Apollo spacecraft was able to re-enter the Earth atmosphere at about Mach number 36. Now, if you are traveling at such high Mach numbers, can you imagine what is the temperatures which the hypersonic vehicle will experience, or what are the temperatures which could make everything disastrous. So just for an information that 90, on Apollo spacecraft was the only re-entry vehicle which could achieve Mach number 36, beyond which we have never gone. Okay. So in 1960s, that is 1960 to 1970, we have seen many space missions or the spacecraft, that too the man orbital spacecrafts. You could see the Mercury, you could see the Gemini, and you could see the Apollo in this figure. So how could India be left behind in the field of hypersonics? So India's ventures into hypersonic in close to 1970s, and it was able to uh, develop the first hypersonic wind tunnel at the Indian Institute of Science in 1984. Further, obviously, there were many hypersonic wind tunnels came in various institutions and in the industries. Then in 2012, Professor Rodham Narasimha developed the 0.5 meter hypersonic wind tunnel at IISc. And in 1973, the Professor N.M. Reddy also developed the hypersonic shock tunnel at IISc. Now you may ask me, what is the use of all these facilities which are being developed? So to simulate actual atmospheric conditions where the hypersonic vehicle will travel, it is not possible to actually build an aircraft or build a re-entry vehicle or build a missile and then let it go into the atmosphere and test it. So these kind of facilities help us to understand what kind of flow physics will the uh, vehicle will experience when it is traveling at uh, at Mach number greater than 5 and at a properties of the atmosphere at a given altitude. So if you are able to create the atmospheric condition in the ground-based facilities, you will be able to estimate all these different parameters, flow physics. So these are some of the studies which are being done at IISc or also in other institutes. Like this is from the same wind tunnel which is shown on the right hand side, that is 0.5 meter wind tunnel, where they have tested how the unsteady shock waves will at a hypersonic speeds will affect the body or will affect the body which is axisymmetric in nature, and how we are able to push this shock wave away from the body. Can we do any measures to like the passive measures or the active measures to push this shock away from the body so that the heat or the mechanical loads faced by the body could be reduced. So these are some of this is again one of the numerical study that we had done at BMSC to put a shock to push the shock wave away from the body by placing a aerospike in front of it. Okay, so that's an aerospike which is kept in front of the body, which is attached to the body nose, and which is able to push the shock quite away from the body. So how do you characterize the hypersonic flow, or what happens when you go hypersonic? So in a typical hypersonic flow, you will see a thin shock layer, you will see an entropy layer, you will see a viscous interaction, and you will see a low density flows. Obviously, the hypersonic will be more important when you are traveling at a low density atmosphere, okay, which happens at about 90 to 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. So by thin shock layer, I mean that when the shock wave comes very close to the body at hypersonic speeds, when the shock wave comes very close to the body, there is a sudden change in the properties of the flow. And when that sudden change in the properties of the flow takes place, the pressure, temperature, or the density in the atmosphere will increase drastically. And that increase in these flow properties will create the hot region between the body and the shock wave. And that hot region is called as a shock layer. Since the shock wave is very, very close to the body, that hot layer is called as a thin shock layer. And the temperatures which this thin shock layer will persist will be about 3000 degrees centigrade to 10,000 degrees centigrades. So if you see any commercial aircraft which is traveling at a Mach number less than 1 will experience the temperatures of about 600 degrees centigrade. So that's why the whole aircraft could be made of an aluminium material, and it could be flown in the atmosphere, which aluminum can bear all these things. So yeah, and if you see a fighter aircraft which is traveling at a supersonic speeds, would experience the temperatures of about 1600 degrees centigrade, and that can also be compensated by putting a materials like a titanium or even the composite materials. Okay, but if you're traveling at a speed Mach number greater than 5, you may experience temperatures that is as low as 3000 degrees centigrade to as high as 10,000 degree centigrades. Now, to bear such high temperatures, you need to have the materials which could sustain at such high heat loads. So what happens when you have such high temperatures is this. So your spaceship or the spacecraft or the re-entry vehicle or the hypersonic vehicle, any hypersonic vehicle will experience such kind of catastrophic damage. The fuselage will go off or it will burnt off into ashes. So there are certain challenges in the hypersonic flows, like the thermal barrier, which is the main challenge. And because of the thermal barrier that you have at a hypersonic speed, you have to develop the materials which will be compatible to that particular temperature. Like so, we will be developing the thermal protection systems for the hypersonic vehicles. So, and there are high mechanical loads, there is a low density atmosphere, and the maneuverability of the craft. So, what is the fundamental problem in hypersonic is to calculate the mechanical loads on the aircraft and to investigate the thermal loads on the aircraft, which might be very easy for the subsonic and the supersonic flows. But if you talk about hypersonic, these both these loads have a strong coupling among themselves, and there has to be a design strategy to estimate this kind of loads on a hypersonic vehicle. Okay, so there are certain a few research which is going on in the world, like be it ISRO, DARPA, Boeing, or NASA, to name a few, have been investing in a hypersonic technology to develop the technology such that in maybe in another 10, 20, 30 years, we will be able to do so. Obviously, all of them have been working on this technology from past 50, 60 years. So just for an example, Boeing's X-51 Wave Rider, which took its unmanned flight in 2013, was able to achieve the speeds of about 1788 meters per second, which is 1.7 kilometer per second, and at an altitude of about 21 kilometers. Okay, I have a small video to show for this flight. This is the Boeing's Wave Rider being launched at a particular altitude. Goes to altitude of about 21 kilometers. This is only a cinematic view of the craft. And then you launch your vehicle. So maybe in a near future, if such kind of hypersonic vehicle is possible, then we will be able to carry humans from one place to another. So most important thing to note about this aircraft is that at hypersonic speed, if you are designing any commercial aircraft, it has to operate at a by means of a scramjet engine. The scramjet engine, which is shown in this particular video, is integrated with the airframe completely, which intakes the high-speed air, and that is uh, air goes to the combustion at a supersonic speeds, and it is able to generate a speeds as high as Mach number 4 or Mach number 5. So you could see on the right hand side, there is the altimeter and the Mach meter which is shown, which shows the altitude of the craft as well as the Mach number that it is achieving at a different instant of time. Okay, so Boeing is still working on redesigning the X-51 wave rider. Why it is called as wave rider? Because goes it pierces the wave, that is a shock wave, which is created at a hypersonic or the supersonic speeds. So hence it is called as a wave rider, which is still under development. If you recall the NACA's X-43A, which was launched on November 16, 2004, was able to achieve Mach number 9.6, but that was only for a few seconds, maybe for 20 or 30 seconds, and then the craft went down. And then they are still researching on this hypersonic aircraft. And then the DARPA, it is working on hypersonic technology vehicle to carry again the human beings from one place to another. And Lockheed Martin is also working on a hypersonic vehicle to upgrade its previously known Blackbird, that was SR-71. They want to upgrade it to SR-72 to Mach number greater than 5. And obviously, the research in India is progressing towards the hypersonic field, where the low-cost access to space could be provided if we are able to develop such technology. So this is a picture, the schematic view of the reusable launch vehicle technology demonstrator, which was, I think, a few years ago. They have tested this vehicle. And then there is also some development in hypersonic by DRDO when they successfully demonstrated that the missiles or the hypersonic aircraft could be made achieve Mach number 6 on September 7, 2020. I think they did this, which again was powered by scramjet engine, and at an altitude of this particular HSTDV, that is hypersonic test demonstrative vehicle, was able to achieve the speeds of Mach 6 at an altitude of 32.5 kilometer in just mere 20 seconds. And with this demonstration technology that India has, India became the 4th country in the world to have such a technology. Okay, after obviously US, Russia, and China. Then ISRO has also tested the capsule, the space capsule, which it is planning to launch during the Gaganyaan mission. And this testing is being carried out from last 15 years, not only in the field of navigation, guidance, control, but also to understand what happens when the hypersonic aerothermodynamic environment comes into the picture. Okay, and what happens to the thermal reprotection system. So maybe in a couple of years we'll see some the manned mission or the unmanned manned mission to the space. And recently in December 2020, the India has set up its biggest facility of hypersonics, that is the hypersonic wind tunnel in the DRDO's DRDL laboratory at Hyderabad. This is a 1 meter test section, and with this facility, we'll be able to estimate what happens around a given hypersonic vehicle. Like, we will be able to study the shock layers, the viscous interaction, the entropy layer, the stagnation temperatures, and all these different aspects. And with this, the India became the 3rd country after US and Russia to have such a facility. So all the research that is going on in the world is mainly in the field of propulsion system, that is to have a efficient scramjet engine which will be able to propel the craft at a hypersonic speeds. And when you have a hypersonic speeds, you have a thermal loads. So the material development is being done to ensure that the protection to the hypersonic vehicle is adequate. So ultra high temperature ceramics are being developed to sustain such high temperatures. There are guidance laws being developed because if you travel at such high speeds, you will not be able to maneuver your vehicle in any direction. So guidance laws are important to perform any maneuver. So where you have been from last 50, 60 years till now. So if you see this particular graph, so from hypersonic was first introduced in closely to 1945 to 1950s, but 1960 to 1970 has seen lot of missions in hypersonics. But after that, there is a huge dip in the field of research of hypersonics. But now it is today in 21st century, it is picking up to the it's picking up again. Okay. So why there is a dip? Do you think? So the dip is because of the huge investment that the hypersonic technology needs to be done. So that's the only reason why you're able to see that dip here. So there have not been so much of interest as well as not so much of investment being poured into the hypersonic field. So today, every other country is putting their money into the hypersonics and will try to get the hypersonic vehicles into their domains. Okay, so here we don't know what happens in the future, but it looks like it goes up, but hopefully in the near future we will be able to see some kind of hypersonic vehicles like this. These are all the imagination that we do, or you might have seen some of the Star Trek movies or the Star Wars movies, the science fiction movies, which shows the hypersonic vehicles traveling from one planet to other planet. Maybe in a near future that is possible. And if you dream of something, you should not sleep. Okay, so to make this technology happen, we have to work. So probably in the next 20 years or 30 years, we might have a commercial flight with the same cost, commercial flight of hypersonics. Okay, these are some of the references, and thank you. If there are any questions, I would like to take up. Thank you, Kishore.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mandlik. It was a stimulating session. I'm sure many of the students got motivated from this lecture. I now request students to send their questions. Okay, we have one question. It says if aerospikes are very good for drag reduction, then why don't we see it as a common practice in launch vehicles?
No, yeah, aerospikes are very good for the drag reduction. Okay. Plus, obviously, your heat transfer has to be reduced. But when you're launching any vehicle, you don't go hypersonic directly. It might take another like 1 minute or 2 minutes, and in that very short time, you would have already reached the Earth atmosphere. Okay, you would have already escaped the Earth atmosphere. So you actually do not need such kind of uh, such kind of technology like the aerospikes to be included in the rockets. Okay, it could be a huge investment. So another important thing about the aerospike is they are mainly used for the missiles, which could be guided and from one continent to other. But for the rockets, you might not be seeing it because it merely takes only like 20 seconds. Only for 20 after 20 seconds or 1 minute, you might reach. You might not even reach the hypersonic speeds. So that could be the answer for this question.
Okay. The another question is, what's the difference between supersonic and hypersonic flow? Is it only related to the Mach number or the flow regarding
So
the
is it?
flow, it seems?
Yeah. Okay. So the supersonic or hypersonic flow, like as a thumb rule, you have the supersonic flow traveling from m. As a thumb rule, we say the flow between Mach 1 to 5 is supersonic, and Mach number greater than 5 you have hypersonic. But it is not necessary that you will experience the hypersonic flow greater than Mach number 5. So nothing great happens when you go from Mach number 4.99 to 5.01. So the Mach number, So in hypersonics, what we actually see is the flow physics, what is happening around the vehicle. So maybe as I talked about the characteristics of the hypersonic flows. Okay, just main, yeah. Yeah, when I talk about the characteristics of a hypersonic flow, these characteristics can happen at Mach number as low as Mach number as low as 3, as or this might happen Mach number at a Mach number of 8. So whenever the aircraft experience these characteristics, you call that flow as a as a hypersonic flow. Okay, there is not a very huge reason, but just as a thumb rule, we say that the hypersonic flow starts at a Mach number 5. Okay, so it can also start at 4.5, it can also start at Mach number 6, Mach number 7, Mach number 8. Not a big issue, depending on which atmosphere you are traveling in. Okay, so these are the characteristics that you should look at when you are talking about the hypersonic flow. Yeah, sure.
Okay. One question is regarding materials. Can you shed a light on what sort of materials are used for hypersonic vehicles?
So if you talk about materials, generally they use the ultra high temperature ceramics like silicon carbides or zirconium boroids. So such kind of materials are being used not for the entire aircraft, because if you coat the entire aircraft with such kind of materials, if you make the entire aircraft using this material, it will become very cost worthy. So what they do is they coat the materials on the nose of the body, such that, let's say for instance this reentry vehicle, the material is coated on the surface of the body, and the materials which are used mostly are the ultra high temperature ceramics, which includes the silicon carbides or the zirconium borides. And nowadays there is some research being going on where the carbon-carbon composites are being infiltrated with the ultra-high temperature ceramics to increase the efficiency or increase the temperature limits that the material can bear. Yeah, Kishore.
Yes. We'll take one more question.
Yes.
Can you shed a light on shock tube and visual effects steering method?
Shock tubes and
how do we see the results in the shock tube?
How do we see the results in the shock tube? Okay, I think he's talking about the shock tube and the shock tunnel in combined, right?
Yes,
Probably.
yes.
So when you talk about the shock tunnels are quite different from the wind tunnel that you see in this figure. The shock tunnels are are the low cost facilities which could help us in understanding some of the flow physics of the flow field. Okay, so how do you visualize the flow? So as you see in this particular figure, you have this test section. Okay, so you have the test section in the figure. So similar test section will be there in the shock tunnel. Only thing is you might have a different flow properties in the test section. Now, how do you visualize this? You just have to put a camera, but just putting a camera doesn't help. So you have to use maybe a Schlieren technique. So Schlieren technique works on the principle of refraction of light, where I think you can go and learn about what is Schlieren technique. So once the light is, just to give you a what is that? The clear understanding about what Schlieren does is, like, let us assume that the car any flashlight is coming on your eyes. So what you will do, you'll shrink your eyes, right? So once you shrink your eyes, what will happen is you will be able to see whether it's a one single flashlight or there are multiple small lights which are combined together to create that light. So that means what you are actually doing, you are refracting the light waves. You are not allowing the entire flashlight to come onto your eyes. You are diminishing, or you are eliminating some of the light rays by shrinking your eyes. So that is the same thing what is done in the Schlieren. You have a light, your light rays coming from one side, and you have an object in the middle, and the object will be because object in the middle, and the light will pass through the object, and it will refract in all the direction, deflect in all the direction. And once you cut the light at a focal point, you will be able to see that able to see the density gradients in the flow field. Okay, so what actually the light does is, air has the small molecule. There are very fine molecules in the air, so that molecules will refract the light which is coming onto it. And once you are able to stop how much of light you want to stop, you can cut it, and how much of light you want to bring it onto the camera, which is the eye. Okay, and you can see what is happening to the that particular air molecule. So the basically the density gradient, the Schlieren estimates the density gradient in the flow field. Yeah, Kishore.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Mandik. Just last question, that can you just tell the student or suggest student the subjects which they should concentrate upon, so that they uh, they would like to pursue research in hypersonics, where they
Yeah.
should concentrate in.
Yeah, so the very fundamentals of the hypersonic flows comes from your thermodynamics and the gas dynamics. So you might like to pursue the courses like gas dynamics, and then the hypersonic aerodynamics or hypersonic flow theory or hypersonic aerothermodynamics. Okay, and if you want to go in much deeper, you can go for, or you want to go for into much deeper, you can go for high temperature gas dynamics. So these are the like 2 3 courses which you can pursue, which you can take it up to understand what is hypersonics, and what it how you could build or design a vehicle in for the hypersonic
Yes.
flow regime. Yeah.
Okay. I sincerely thank you, Dr. Mandlik, for giving your invaluable time and enlightening us on this very critical topic in aerospace domain. I hope that we'll continue to have association with you, and we would love to have your cooperation and guidance to our students in this particular field. I
Yeah.
once again take this opportunity and thank you so much for giving us this stimulating session. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Kishore. Thank you
Yeah.
all of you for attending. Yeah.
I conclude here. Thank you. Okay, sir, we are done.